This is Sean Warner, author of Lee Howard and the Ghosts of Simmons Pierce Manor, and you are listening to the Bigfoot Club.
Hey everybody, Robert Jesse Dominguez, Bigfoot Club. I'm here with my nephew, Steven. Steven, say what's up.
What's up?
So this is episode 7.
Season
6.
Season 6,
episode 7.
Siete.
So before we go any further, I just wanted to say if you're listening to the show for the first time and you haven't hit the follow button or subscribe, please do it at this time because it really helps us out a lot. Right?
Yep.
So
please do.
Yeah.
It would help us out a lot.
Yeah, subscribe, do a 5-star review, even do if you want to critique the show, go ahead and do that as well because we want to get better.
Yeah.
So what's going on with you right now?
Nothing much. Just tired from last night, man. But it was worth it. So
yeah, it was.
Yeah. Talking about doing the show, nothing nasty. You freaks.
Weird. What made you say that?
I don't know. People are gonna be like, "What did they do last night?" They're not even saying anything. What the heck?
Well, that's kind of weird. But
yeah.
Anyway,
clarification.
We have in our club today, Beyond the Unknown with Andre and Daniel.
Dude, I'm happy to be on as well, man. And thanks for having us. It's very exciting for us to come on and talk to some more, Bigfoot believers. It's funny because when you look at the history of Bigfoot, something that Daniel brought up in our last episode when we were talking to Matt Knapp. That episode's located it's also available on YouTube and on Spotify as well under Beyond the Unknown. He had talked about the Native Americans, about their history. Daniel, you talked about how like Bigfoot has been a part of their history.
Yeah.
Can you touch on that again real quick? Because I thought that was really interesting, that aspect of Bigfoot.
Well, I think it tied back to a little bit more about myths and stuff that you only hear about in books, and just kind of even though things happen in the past and you haven't been able to actually find it, it doesn't make it fake, right? So if Native Americans have been talking about it and, settlers have been talking about it for a long time as well, then there has to be something true with it. A lot of, folklore and stuff like that can actually be true in a sense. Sometimes it's actually over dramatized. It's just a little over the top. But I think that there's things that are out there that these older cultures that have been around for a long time in these states. I think there's definitely some truth to it.
Mm-hmm. I have to agree completely. There's been some incidents because I know. From my background, I've been a Bigfoot researcher since the 90s, and I met Matt in 2005, and I was one of the 12 original members of the Texas Bigfoot Research Center. It's now called the North American Wood Ape Conservancy, I think. And prior to that, we would go out and sometimes we had to go to Native American land, and we would constantly deal with Caddo and Choctaw. And those guys, if you're not Choctaw or Caddo, they don't want to talk to you. They will not talk to you at all. Mm-hmm. And you have to get whenever, I think was a time, Steven, do you remember that when we had there was a story about a Bigfoot going to a back of a casino and drinking out of a grease pit. Do you recall that?
Yep, I remember that.
And so there was a guy, it was a friend of ours. He was a documentary guy. I'm not going to say his name because, I didn't get permission. So, he asked me, he goes, "Hey, you want to go up there and go check out this casino?" I go, "Yeah." It was right in the middle of Caddo Nation. And so we drove up there to go hang out and try to get, this footage supposedly that was in the back of this casino because this Bigfoot walked up behind this this casino that like to drink out of a grease pit. There's another researcher, David Wilbanks, out of Oklahoma. He got to see the video before we did. And so we went up there, and we weren't Native American, and so they didn't let us see it. They didn't let us see the video. They didn't let us talk to anybody. And we drove all the way up there. I said, man, I don't want to leave without, talking to anybody. So we had to go into town. We had to be ushered by Caddo police, and we had to talk to like the elders there, and then we had to get like a liaison to walk with us to talk to anybody. Nobody wanted to talk to us at all. So we drove up there, and we ended up talking to a Native Affairs officer, and I had a tape recorder. And this is back, we didn't have digitals back then, so I had a tape recorder, and I had it on, and he says, turn that off, and I'll talk to you. So I turned it off. He goes, man, they're here all the time. I just can't say it. I go, really? So he was telling us these stories about Bigfoot's coming up and stealing like watermelons and cantaloupe and like, livestock and stuff. And, Native Americans would call it in, and like the police would go out there and investigate, but they, other than their own tribe, they wouldn't talk to anybody else about that. So it's just real tough, just to go off what Daniel was saying. It's real secretive. Like they always tell us, like, don't whistle in the woods. They always say that. Don't whistle in the woods. So it's, kind of tricky on that. So
especially at night.
Yeah.
Don't do it at night.
Don't do it at night. You
Don't do it at night.
You don't know who you're going to call.
Yeah, you don't know who you're going to invite or bring in and stuff. So, yeah, that was an interesting one. I still to this day wish that we saw that video.
Yeah.
It would have been nice.
Yeah, because like right prior for us leaving, because we had the one gentleman that was filming everything, and then we had the liaison with us, and we were in the woods, and I get out of the vehicle, and the guy asked me, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm gonna go do a tree knock." So I went out. I did a tree knock, and like Steven followed me, right? And they go, "Steve, where are you going?" He goes, "I'm going to go be with my uncle." Right?
Yeah, I was like, if anything happens, then we want to be right there. So
yeah, come on, man.
Yeah, so they were like,
they were.
At the time, I was like 16, and they were like in their
30s. Yeah,
like, nah, man, I'm staying in the car.
So I go out, guys, and I do like 3 tree knocks, and then I do a yell, and within 20 seconds.
Yeah, we got a response.
We got to yell back.
Response.
And our liaison goes, "It's time to go. We should probably go."
And it wasn't like it was like 6 something.
It was like
yeah,
6.
you done it.
It was about to be night, and he was like, we really need to get out of here whenever it's like before nighttime."
Yeah.
Like,
so okay.
Oh my god.
Yeah, like it was really bad, and it's like that person's from there.
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
So I didn't. I guess didn't want to make them uncomfortable as much as they were already.
Yeah,
and
it's interesting. I wonder if they have evidence of Bigfoot that they don't share.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
They're trying to protect it in a way.
Yes.
But you would think too is like and this is the more cynical side of it. If they wanted to make some kind of profit, you would expose the fact that hey, Bigfoot is here. And it just bothers me so much that Bigfoot has become such a taboo where it's like, if you talk about Bigfoot, it's like, oh, here we go. Like, I mean, this is totally off topic, well, sort of. Like today, my in-laws were over. We're having breakfast, and he goes, so what's the difference between a Bigfoot and a Yeti? I was like, what are you talking about? Because it was hell random. I was like, what? And like, oh, I heard you were doing, a podcast about like Bigfoot and stuff. What's that all about? And so I talked to them about it, but again, it's like the first inclination is that like, oh yeah, that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, well, dude, with the amount of reports and stories that are out there, it's kind of like, look, it's hard to say that something like this doesn't exist out there.
Yeah.
I mean, you want to tell me that everyone thinks that they see Bigfoot when it's really a bear? I highly doubt that.
Yeah. I met John Bennernickel. He's a wildlife biologist out of British Columbia. He's already passed already. But he came down for the Texas Bigfoot Research Center's first Bigfoot conference. And he's got one of the best books. Like, if you're like a beginner, like in Bigfoot, I would highly recommend getting his book because it's a really good book. And I asked him the question. I go, how come we can't film a Bigfoot? What's the deal with that? And then, he says, Rock goes, well, Robert, you have to, he goes, a deer is like really has a really good sense of keen smell and sight and hearing, but it has a small brain. He says, Bigfoots are the same thing, but they have a big brain. So if they don't want you around, if they don't want to be seen, they will go. And if they want to be seen, they will let you know. They will, because I think at times they pick and choose people. I don't know why, but they pick and choose people to let them see them. I don't know why, but that's just one of those things like, with the veil, thinning of the veil, so there's just a lot of, there's more, like I think Matt said before, there's more questions than answers on stuff like that. So,
oh yeah, for sure. So, I mean, and I mentioned it with Matt, it's just, I think there's a lot of curiosity that comes with that species, because you always hear about them. Well, you don't always, but you hear about them a lot more, like, peeking through the bushes, peeking around trees, walking away from something, but, you do hear them, but they're less infrequent of more like, hey, right in your face type of experience where like this guy just came swinging out of a tree and just jumped right next to me. And I was like, no, you don't hear that very often. It's more of like, it's a curiosity that got the best of him. And then, someone ended up seeing him. So, it must be quite the experience running into something like that in the woods, either day or night.
Absolutely. Because I've researched a lot of stuff, and I'll say this. I did it in Texas a lot, in East Texas, over in Lamar County. I've done it there. And it took me about 6 months, because I knew there were Bigfoot there, because we were getting sighting reports out of there, because our first sighting report out of there was, because inside Paris there's a Campbell Soup factory, and it's right next to Pat May's Lake. And so we got a sighting report of a security guard saying that these Bigfoots were coming to the back of the company and like rummaging through dumpsters. And so we drove down there to go talk to him. And then when we got there, he was like, mum's the word. He didn't want to talk to us anymore. And so, but we knew there were like Bigfoot there. And so constantly, it took me like 6 months. I would go knock on doors. I would hang out at boat ramps over by Pat May's Lake with a parabolic dish, and just sat there for 6 months until I actually started getting either stories or people, or like I would hear stuff in the woods. It got closer and closer and closer. I would just say this out loud. I've never seen one, but I've had rocks thrown at me. I've had, it screamed at both of us, me and Steven. And so we've had all this stuff happen to us, but I've never seen one, but I've it just took a while for them to come closer to us as we were like camped out in certain areas inside Paris, Texas. So
when you talk about them screaming at you, can you describe that story of when they screamed at you?
Yeah, there was an incident one time. Stephen, you weren't with me. Mm-mm. We were in Oklahoma and at this town called Moyers, and it's right on the edge of the Kiamichi Mountains. And so, they call them mountains, but they're really just big hills. So, so you have to own property to be like in these Kiamichis, and you have to have, and I had a buddy of mine, he had a cabin up there. So we went up there to go, spend the weekend, clear out his cabin, cut some firewood and stuff. And then he was telling us there's a dam, down the mountain. He wanted to go check it out, that the owner had built so for people couldn't go over there and fish. So we walked down there, and once we walked down there, I smelled like rotten eggs, like garbage, like pee and like wet dog. You smell it. I go, do you smell that?
Yeah,
and we go, yeah.
That's a common smell, the wet dog.
Yeah.
Wet dog.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so there was this tree line that's probably like, I don't know, maybe 30 yards from us. Mm-hmm. And then we would hear these growls, just and like, I go, that's not a pig, right? That's, and it just got louder and louder and louder. And it was, as it was getting louder, it was vibrating our chest. And so at that time, we didn't have any weapons. This thing sounded really, really angry. I was real early, like in my Bigfoot research stuff. So I think the older me would have just like stood there and just like, okay, come out, whatever. And like
let's do this.
Yeah. And so the younger me says, okay, we're leaving. So we started walking up this hill, and at that time I was out of shape and I could not run up this hill because it was just too steep. And
I remember that hill. I remember in high school when you showed me that hill. Going down was so easy. I was like, oh, they had this is what they're talking. And then going up was a different story. I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it was steep, and like, you know, let me just say this, guys. On the way down, you know, it had just rained, so there was gravel and there was mud and there was puddles, and so I was looking at every puddle, every piece of like mud, just to see if I could see footprints. There was no footprints going down, and as we were coming up, there was now footprints parallel to the our track, and I go, that wasn't there before, and like some of the water was moving still, you know, and like these puddles. And so we could hear it growling and getting louder and louder. And then for some reason, I don't know why I did this, but I just yelled really loud, okay, we're leaving now. And so it stopped. And like, we went up, went up the trail back over to the cabin. Later on that night, you know, we got some rocks pelted at us throughout the night. And, the back of the cabin was slapped a couple times.
Would you have laughed if whenever you said, okay, we're leaving now, it was about damn time.
Oh yeah, then it's like, whoa, right.
Okay, this is not a Bigfoot.
Yeah.
They can talk.
No, they can talk. It actually is a Bigfoot.
Yeah,
I know.
So yeah,
but even that story alone, like the growling you were talking about how you can feel it like vibrating in your chest. That's how deep and kind of bassy that the growl was. I mean, there's not a lot of creatures out there that can make that type of, you know, vibration and noise. I don't even think a bear
in the US
would do that.
Yeah, you know, because like I was telling you like before that I did like 20 years of research, and then I was a case director for a paranormal group for like 10, and I had another podcaster tell me when I was being interviewed by them. I was comparing ultrasound to what's the other one? EMF.
Mm-hmm.
And she says that sounds like the same, because like, you know, whenever you get bombarded by EMF, everybody's different. I always say this all the time. You know, everybody has like different feelings. They get lightheaded, headaches, they get nauseated, you know, they get scared. And the same thing is with you know, that ultrasound. And there's no data for this, but there's like only like whenever I interview people, I would go back and talk to them. I said, were you scared? Were you nauseated? Did you have a headache? And they go, yes, I did. I go, that's just funny how you asked me that. So I think that, you know, that's where the world of the paranormal and Bigfoot kind of cross a little bit, is that same EMF. Because there's been like hundreds of stories of Bigfoot's being attracted to cemeteries. Why? I always wonder that. Why? Is it because there's paranormal activity there? And then like on our show, we've always said that, you know, if Bigfoots are flesh and blood, eventually they have to die. Okay, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Why wouldn't they have a ghost? Because like there's some people who say, I've seen a Bigfoot and he just vaporized and disappeared. Mm-hmm. So I've always thought that, because like there's, you know, like there's two type of categories in Bigfoot. I don't know if you guys knew. There's the woo, and then there's the regular people that just think about flesh and blood. And you know, the more people I talk to who tell me these stories about paranormal stuff, you know, added onto it, I can't dismiss it. You know, I have to take it and like listen to what they have to say. And then, you know, me being in the paranormal and, you know, the Bigfoot world, that stuff kind of coincides a little bit. Cause like, you know, whenever you're a researcher, especially like in East Texas, there's electrical right of ways, there's gas right of ways, and hardly anybody talks about these. But these are avenues that Bigfoots and game use to cut through a county. And so there's a lot of EMF in that area because you got power lines going through there.
Yeah.
And I hear, you know, lots of stories of hunters, you know, using that and setting up, you know, areas to, you know, like tree stands and stuff. and then they get chased out of there by a Bigfoot. And I was talking to Steven about this. I said, man, maybe they're weaponizing this. Maybe they're using that strong EMF to scare the crap out of people, because people are scared of them already. And there's some stories that I've heard on other podcasts of hunters running out of electrical right of way and just shooting behind them. And that's like a no-no with hunters. They don't do that. You can't do that. So what would scare these hunters so bad that they just like start firing behind them? They don't even care. So we had always thought, I said, well, maybe they're weaponizing this area, like this gas and electrical right of ways, because, you know, that's just, you know, something that you can think about, but there's no data for that. There's no way of proving it.
Yeah,
so,
no.
but I just go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that, you know, that has always intrigued me, that those stories like that. And then Bigfoot stories of, them doing strange things, like, you know, because like you always get the story of like a you know, someone driving down the road, a Bigfoot crosses the road, they see it, they get scared, they drive on, or, you know, a hunter's out in the woods and he sees a Bigfoot, you know, he shoots a deer, Bigfoot comes up, scoops up the deer, takes off. But I've always been interested in stories like facial expressions, you know, things that Bigfoots normally don't do, because there was a story that I heard from another researcher that it was at this golfing, it was at a golfing resort, like to the left of the golfing resort was like woods and steep hills. And then over to the right was this golfing resort. And it was this old couple. I think it was a doctor and his wife. Do you remember this story, Steve?
Yeah. This one, it always gives me chills.
So this lady was driving down this road, and like I said, the golf course was on the right. And they saw this person like in the ditch, like kind of hunched over, and she thought, oh, they're walking and it's desolate out here. Let's stop and ask if this person's okay. So she stops, rolls down the window, and says, do you need help? And it was a Bigfoot in a really deep ditch. And it turned and looked at her, and she just gasped. She just went, and then this Bigfoot did the exact same thing. And then ran up this steep like embankment. And so I think one of my buddies took this sighting report, but the doctor, you know, the guy that was the passenger, the wife was driving, and the passenger was like an older doctor that was doing business in town. So he didn't want his name out because he didn't want to get discredited and people not come to him and stuff like that. But stories like that's I've always been interested in stuff like that. So.
Yeah, that reminds me of a story. Oh, sorry, Andre. That reminds me of a story I heard recently where there was two guys, and I believe it was in Arkansas, and this happened about 20 years ago. One of the guys was, playing college baseball or for like a junior college of some sort, and they like to hunt. You know, they're in their early 20s. They go out in the woods to try to find some desolate area to kind of set up a turkey hunting area. And they drove their trucks about as far as they can drive, and then they had bikes, so they took the bikes out and they drove out about another 45 minutes, and they decided, hey, let's just finish this on foot and see if we can find anything. So they walked for at least another hour, they said, and there was a guy in the front and a guy behind him, his buddy behind him. He was like 10 feet behind him. And the guy in the front had a rock thrown at him. And they both stopped and they looked around, and they even said, hey, knock it off, show yourself. Because they thought it was just some dude out there. But he was just like, there could be no one out there because we're deep in the woods. And he's like, we're basically on like private land out in the middle of nowhere doing things that we shouldn't be doing. So they decided, well, let's keep on walking. So they kept on walking, and about 15 minutes later, another rock was thrown at them. And this time the guy in the front turned around and was able to locate where it came from. Mm-hmm. And he said that he saw a hairy man, basically a Bigfoot out there. And he said that he was standing next to a tree and really long arms, past his knees. He can see his face. The skin was kind of gray, he said, and he can tell that it was a male Bigfoot, which is interesting because you don't hear that very often. People who see them be able to identify, is this a male or a female? I mean, you would think a male Bigfoot would be showing off a little bit here and there.
His junk you talking about?
Yeah. So he waited about 10 or 15 seconds as the Bigfoot dashed out of view, and he's like, man, I ran up that hill as fast as I could. I was literally up there within I was up there less than 30 seconds, and when I got there, there was nothing. There was nothing up there. It's like it disappeared. And he said that he's like, I don't know why I felt it, but I felt static. I felt static up there. Like there was like a static charge. And he goes, now when I go in the woods and if I feel that static charge, I know that there's one around. So it just kind of ties back to the power lines and kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I've heard stories like that that's associated to something like that.
Now, let me ask this question. So, do you know in the story, did the hunters continue to hunt? Did they get in their trees?
No, they bailed out. They bailed out.
So
we're out of here.
Yeah, they booked it.
It sounds like to me that these guys were infringing upon its grounds, its hunting grounds itself. So it was likely telling them, hey, this is ours. Maybe you need to go.
Yes, it's time to go back, boys.
So,
what's funny is that the story, if you continue to listen to it, they leave because his buddy was scared shitless. He wanted to keep looking for it, but his buddy was like, hell no, I want to go home. So they went home, and then he went back out there a week later, and the road that they took to get out there had a gate on it, and it was locked all of a sudden. So it got kind of weird like that, where like all of a sudden now there's a gate, it's locked, and he wasn't able to go back there. But
the cojones on that one, that guy.
Oh yeah, major man. I was like, hey, that's good enough for me right there.
He went after it, like.
I'd be like, I want to hang out. I want to hang out with that guy.
Yeah, it's like if I'm that hunter, it's like either I'm going to shoot it or I'm going to run.
Well,
I'm not going to run at it.
Unarmed.
But still, like to have the balls to go chasing after something that looks that menacing, that's insane. And and the fact that they came back and there was a gate, again, it kind of leads to that same talk of like, why? In some cases, it feels like there's a bit of suppression when it comes to Bigfoot and its appearances. Like, there's an encounter, and then for some reason there's like you said, a gate, that blocks out that road. You're like, who's doing that and why are they doing that?
I wonder,
why are they suppressing the information.
Bigfoots have their own HOA. They probably
they do.
I wonder what state that was. I wonder what state, because like I think
it was Arkansas, if I remember. It was or Alabama, one of those kind of states. It started with the A.
I can tell you off experience that
it wasn't Alaska. I'll tell you that.
Okay, I can tell you off experience that dealing with Texas, I've got harassed by game wardens and park rangers all the time, and I had a buddy of mine that was a retired constable, and he still had his radio, and so whenever I was in the area, he would call me on my cell and he goes, "Hey, are you in town?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Man, the chatter's all over the radio about you guys being out there." And so we would go down these trails, and I think they had like these markers that that would trigger whenever our car would pass. And so there was a couple of times we would go out to an area. I think it was in Sulphur Springs, Texas, and we would get stopped. We would get approached by game wardens and park rangers, and like in the very beginning, I used to say, "Oh yeah, we're like Bigfoot guys," and they would hang out with us until we left. They wouldn't let us do anything. So after we would move around and I would change, because at the time I was going to school and I had a student ID. So I just kind of lied to them. I said that I was doing a paper on deer migration and I was doing soil samples. And they go, okay. And they
I'm studying ants.
So
like, okay.
So they just left us alone and stuff like that. But, I can know offhand, because they won't talk about unclassified animals at all. They just they don't want to.
That was smart. The deer migration.
Yeah.
That was very smart, man.
Thanks, man. I get them every now and then.
Yeah.
Was that a freestyle one, or was
it was. It was. I was spitting it for because I was going to school and I said, man, what's the deal?
And you had a student ID. So
yeah. He asked for it, and I pulled it out and showed it to him. And it was different. It was DeVry though. It was like he wasn't
DeVry University. They're like,
he wasn't smart enough to figure it out. Hey,
yeah, I'd have been like, so does this have something to do with like electronics or electrical? Or
yes, it is.
Electronic deer.
Yeah, we're trying to make game cams.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you guys a question. So,
yeah, go ahead.
What made y'all pick this topic beyond the unknown to do this podcast? What was the base on it?
So I have my other channels, but I always had a fascination. So did Daniel as well. But I always had a fascination in the unexplained, paranormal, extraterrestrial, and obviously cryptics, or cryptids, that is. And, Bigfoot in particular, growing up, I remember we used to have these set of books. You remember those books, Daniel? The ones that mom and dad got from Costco way back in the day. And these books had like UFO, they had the legendary Bigfoot pictures and all that stuff. And, it always just intrigued me, and I always wanted to kind of, dive into this topic, to find answers, to talk to people, to understand different perspectives of these topics. And so I started doing this last year. And then this year, after we started doing our sports channel, I asked Daniel, I said, hey, man, would you want to come on there with me and do some of these interviews? And he was like, yeah, dude, let's do it. And it just makes it that much better, because before it's like, I was doing this by myself and just talking to different people, that I would meet. And it's tough, but like when you have a co-host and my brother, it makes it that much more funner. So that's what got me into this. I've always, with me, I've always had a really big fascination with UFOs and extraterrestrials. He's always been more of like the Bigfoot guy, and like I was telling Matt, not too long ago, I had reached a point where I said, you know what, I don't know if Bigfoot is real, because we would have found it by now. We would have had images by now. But the more and more I listened to not only his podcast, but other podcasts and other stories and research, I started to tell myself, you know what, I think this creature really does exist. Because why would you have this many eyewitness accounts? People, coming out of nowhere to tell their story, to not make a single dime off the story, and to put themselves in a position of ridicule.
Yeah, absolutely.
But they want to tell this story because, the amount of trauma that it can cause an individual to see something like this, where you see something that you cannot recognize, you cannot identify what it is. And I think that, this is something that has existed for a long time. And when you look back at, art from the Middle Ages and from before, you would see, images of what looks like UFOs in the air. And, people back then, I mean, I would even say now, but people back then had no idea what they were looking at. They don't know what a shiny object in the sky is. They talk about, these chariots that would come down from the skies, but they only knew, that's all they knew how to describe what they were looking at. And so when you have encounters where people see these things and they still cannot figure out what they're looking at, but they know, but they lock into the main details, the hair, the size, the size of its arms, its face, if they get a good enough look at it. So there's definitely enough eyewitness accounts that tells me that this creature does exist. And when you look at where it exists, right, it's not just like, oh yeah, there's been a ton of sightings in Oregon. No. I mean, like when you look at a list of like some of the top places that have the most encounters, you're talking about Washington, California, Florida, Ohio, Illinois, Oregon, Texas, Michigan, Missouri, and Georgia. This creature exists throughout the country. Pennsylvania, New York. So and when we talk about how we don't see their corpses laying around, right? No, obviously they're in the deep woods. So if one were to die, decomposing, it would happen fast, or decomposition, that is. But if these things are living, in groups with one another, they likely bury their dead. They likely, dispose of, one of their dead's bodies in its own way. And I think that there is a level of intelligence that's much higher than like a gorilla. You know, I think these things are able to communicate with one another. I think they have traditions, and the fact that they are extremely good at hiding from human beings and disappearing just like that. Right now, we talk about paranormal. We talk about the static electricity and other factors like that. But when we talk about just cold hard science of what they're doing, they are literally going out of their way to stay out of sight from human beings. And the only way they would do that is if they were able to communicate with one another and pass down that tradition of don't make contact with them, don't get near them. Human beings are only trouble. They only bring pain or fear. Just avoid them at all costs.
Yep.
Because we see bears, right? Bears, if they think there's food in your campsite, they're going to walk in your campsite like, hey, what's going on? And they don't seem to care unless you scare them off, in some form or fashion. If a bear wants food, it's going to come out in a parking lot. It's going to come out in someone's residence because it doesn't care. It's like, well, I'm looking for food. I don't give a shit about you. Mm-hmm. But these creatures don't do that. And so the only way that I could rationalize why they would stay hidden, why they would stay out of sight, is because they have a higher level of intelligence in which they can communicate with one another to say, stay in the shadows, stay in the darkness, don't let yourself be seen. And they've done it for thousands of years.
I have to agree with you on that. It is. Yeah. It's almost perplexing how, and like I said this before, it just brings more questions, and it's like, why are they here? Because like anytime, like my mentor Luke Gross, whenever we were going to look at like a sighting area or an area where a Bigfoot was at, he'd always ask us, why was it here? Okay. Work backwards. Why was it here? Mm-hmm. So we had to research area. Like in this area, I said, okay, was it an older Bigfoot? That there used to be a fish hatchery here? Was it that someone used to grow corn or cantaloupe? Do the research. What was here that causes this Bigfoot to come through this area? Like, because there'd be some areas that say, why is the Bigfoot coming through here? And we would just think that way, and it's just like, I don't know. It's just we had to think outside the box most of the time on stuff like that, But the question I was going to ask y'all is that had you guys ever had an experience, whether it's like cryptids or UFOs or paranormal? Have you guys had any experiences?
Well, just to kind of back up and kind of give you a little history about myself, but I will answer that question next. I first got into Bigfoot. I'm actually his older brother, to be exact.
Did I say you were younger?
Yeah, what?
Did I say you were younger?
No, but I am the older brother. But
yes.
We call it. I think it was honestly, it was probably Harry and the Hendersons that first got me into it when that thing came out. I was so young when that came out, but
good movie.
A great movie. But ever since then, you start picking up documentaries. My wife thinks I'm a total nerd because I watch documentaries on Bigfoot all the time. I got my kids into it. I've gone camping up in Lassen State Park for many, many years. Shasta, Shasta Forest up there, and I'm the only guy that does the Sasquatch calls at night. Because I would do them out there because we're literally an hour off the main road in some thick woods next to a river. So my experience with field work is doing the Sasquatch calls at night, and I'm the only guy that was doing it because I'm just kind of weird like that, And one time we were camping.
I've seen him do it. He's not lying. I've seen him do it.
Oh yeah, you've been there. Yeah. So one time we were camping on the southern base of Mount Lassen, and I decided to do some calls at night. And I wasn't doing any of the whoops, which the next time I go out there, I for sure will. But I was doing more of the long, drawn out calls. And I was able to get some responses that night. But my buddies were like, oh, those are coyotes. That's just coyotes howling back at you. So who knows what that was. Another time we were out there at McLeod, and in the morning, my cousin woke up. He told us, he's like, man, there was like a bear standing behind the campsite. And I'm like, yeah, was it a bear? He's like, pretty sure it was a bear. It was standing up looking at us. I'm like, oh, that's weird. But that, that's it, and I think there's a lot of truth to the fact that you can feel that something is watching you. You hear that also. People say that I feel like someone was watching me. Just to put it in context, I was hiking one day when I was camping down there at McLeod River up in Northern California. And we just went for a day hike up the main road. And we're walking up the main road, just being goofballs, whatever, just walking. And I felt that we were being watched. There was a high ridge above me. And I just had a really weird, I kept on looking up there, just kind of to myself. And we finished our walk and decided to head back to get lunch. And now the ridge is on my left side because we're headed back down the road. And as the ridge opened up into a clearing, there was a mountain lion that was walking alongside there. And that put it into like reality for me, especially hearing a lot of the sightings and witnesses of Bigfoot where you can feel that someone is watching you, and it's a real thing. I felt that out there, and it wasn't a Sasquatch, it was a mountain lion. But that is something that, it scared us. We had to walk backwards, and then once we got to the bridge, we gunned it. Yeah. But being watched while you're walking in the woods, you can feel that.
Did you feel like nauseated or headache or lightheaded or anything like that?
No, none of that. No.
Okay.
I mean, I might have been lightheaded because of camping too much, too many beers, but those things, that's a whole different world. But no, I didn't feel any of that. It was just a feeling that someone's watching you.
Right. Okay. So any paranormal incidents or anything like that growing up in an old house, anything like that?
I never had anything that really stood out to me like, oh, that's a ghost. I've had weird things happen to me where you're sitting there and all of a sudden you hear a voice right next to you, and it's like really like loud, and you're thinking, am I the only one that heard that? But it sounded so real that you're like, man, is it just my subconscious? Is it my mind playing tricks on me? But really just kind of stuff like that. Nothing where, things were moved from where it was prior or anything like that. Not that I don't think that exists. I think there is, truth to that because, I feel that, we all have spirits, within our body. And sometimes, depending on the kind of event you have in life and your ending of your life, that spirit can leave an imprint on where you were. And I always use the example of if, you put in an umbrella or you put something over some grass and it's a hot day. And when you pick that off the grass, there's an impression of that. And
that's a good way to put it.
To me, yeah, that's kind of the way I think about it is, if ghosts do exist, it's an imprint of something that was there. And it's usually, a person that was there. And I feel that people have spirits, and that's what really ties me into Bigfoot. Like you said, flesh and blood, or what was the other? You said woo?
Yeah, the woo people believe that, there's portals and dimensions that they step into. And,
right. Yeah. So I don't know much about that, but I feel that if it's flesh and blood, then that is a connection I can have to it.
Yeah.
Because it exists on Earth. And that's kind of how I look at it.
There's one particular story that I was doing, and it was this gentleman. It was he was a contractor of mine, and he used to wrestle. So he's a big dude. He's a big, burly dude, and he actually wrestled Andre the Giant. Up in, I think, either Georgia or Atlanta or somewhere, Atlanta, Georgia, or somewhere, or Tennessee or something. But he was going out to East Texas to go confront his brother-in-law about working, and his brother-in-law lived out in East Texas, and he said he had a critter problem, and he said that this thing jumped out when they were walking to I think the river to go get a fish trap, because that's how he was supporting his family, was hunting and fishing. So they were walking out to go get a fish trap, and this thing jumped off a ridge and landed in front of him. And when he was telling me the story, he said it landed in front of him, and then I said, I go, did it show his teeth? He goes, yes. I go, did it rock back and forth? He goes, holy shit, man, were you there? So I go, continue. So he was telling me the story, and he said this thing was like 2 Andre the Giants shoulder to shoulder. That's how big this thing was. Huge. And he said when it stepped into the woods, he said, and this always stuck with me. It just bothered me too. He said the woods swallowed it up. He said that it was like behind trees, that he knew that this thing was so wide that you could still see it, but he couldn't see it. He said it just stepped into the woods and it disappeared, but he could hear it, and he could see like trees were moving, and they were like to their house, and this thing was like, he was trailing them. It was kind of like shadowing them out. And so whenever he told me that story like that, he goes, "This wood swallowed it up." I go, "Swallowed it?" He goes, "Yeah, it just disappeared." I go,
You hear that a lot too in a lot of stories where they simply almost just like kind of walk backwards and let the forest just sort of inhale them, and they're just gone.
Yeah, because this guy, he never told anybody. He never told his kids, never told his wife. And then, he had heard that I was into Bigfoot, and then he called me. He goes, "Hey, man, can I talk to you about something?" And this was like 20, 30 years later. I said, "Yeah." So we ended up talking like 8 hours on the phone, and he says, "I just want to get this off my chest, man, because like this has always bothered me." He had night terrors. And so I explained to him, I go, that this thing was not going to kill him. And he didn't believe me. He goes, "Man, I don't believe you." I go, if it really wanted to kill you, it would have done it. Because this thing moves so quickly. And he said, I go, "You just stepped in its way to get food, because, that fish trap was his, and it was providing for its family. And so when you encroach upon his grounds, he's going to come out, he's going to show his teeth, he's going to rock back and forth, he's going to shake trees and bushes. And that's just part of it." And then he realized that. He goes, "Oh man." And then he stopped having like these night terrors. And I, even to this day, I still talk to him, and I ask him, "Hey man, what's up? What's going on? You doing okay?" So there's a few people that I've helped throughout the years that I still talk to, and I try to help them out the best I can, because I kind of got to a point, and Steven knows this, that, I quit trying to like prove they exist, and I just try to help people, because there's people that seen this animal or this thing, and they have a hard time coping with it, because they can't go, sometimes to their spouse or their family or their local law enforcement or whatever. So I try to be Bigfoot Club tries to be a conduit for everybody that, that has these kind of experiences. Because like we end up talking to some people, and they never want to come on the podcast. They just want to talk. So we end up talking to them anyway, but we don't record it. So we end up talking, just, helping people out, trying to deal with it. So that's kind of how, we see things and stuff like that. So,
yeah. I think that's really cool, because, just listening to you guys and your sincerity, and, talking with Matt, and just other folks that I've been watching and kind of listening to as I'm working or something like that, or driving home. You can kind of hear that now, where it's like, tell your story if you can, right?
Right.
Because we want to know, but it's also a way for these folks to get this off their chest, to talk to someone that's not going to look at them sideways,
Right.
Because that's a common thing. Even when, I can talk to my buddies about Bigfoot, they just laugh, I have a Bigfoot snow globe on my desk at work. I've had it for years. I'm one of those guys.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, you got it, Bigfoot. I'm like, yeah, why not?
Yeah, I mean, try. Let me just tell you. Like I was doing this before the internet was fast. I would go out to counties, and I knew Bigfoot were there, and I had flyers and I had cards, and I would go knocking on doors, and people would just slam the door in my face. You know, I knew Bigfoot was in the area. They just didn't want to talk about it. And so I end up, talking to people at Walmart or the gasoline station or like a tackle bait shop or something. People go, "Hey, you guys are the Bigfoot guys, right?" And I go, "Yeah." And he goes, "I got a story for you. Let me tell you." You know, so they'll come up to us and start talking to us. So, and especially if you're at a Bigfoot conference and you got a microphone, boy, you get hit up by a lot of people. Go, "Hey, I got a story. I tell you." I go, "Yeah, go, let's go." Mm-hmm. So, but doing the work in the early years, like that's how I met Matt in the field. We were boots on ground. That's how we did it. We did it before the internet, because we were doing it before Facebook, before Twitter or X, whatever it's called now. And we were doing it like, it was Yahoo e-groups. It's probably, I don't know if you remember that, Daniel. So it was like
Yahoo
it was
e-groups. That's pretty old.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, I'm just saying, like those don't exist anymore.
They don't.
Yeah.
So we were doing all that stuff, and that's how we were communicating with people, was through e-groups, and I think it was another one called Firefox or something. Mm-hmm. And I was like, it was another one. I can't think of it. Matt probably knows. And but that's how I kind of met Matt, through the internet, and started talking to him. So then we would go out in the field together a couple times, and but it's just one of those things that I don't know. I kind of enjoy doing it. We don't do it as much anymore. Mm. We don't call ourselves podcasters. We call ourselves cryptid sports entertainers. so that's what we go off now. So we kind of look at it like we're the Sports Illustrated for cryptids and the paranormal, because we've done it. We've been in the field. We've done that stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, when you look at the amount of creatures / animals that exist in this world that have been undiscovered. I mean, you think about what lies at the depths of our ocean. Like only a small percentage of our oceans have actually been explored, and so there's a number of species of animals and sea life and creatures that lived in the water that we've never even seen before. Mm-hmm. And so then when you think about the amount of animals that live out in the wilderness, in the deep parts of the wilderness, I mean, there's no telling how many different types of creatures are out there. And so when it comes to a creature like Bigfoot, I mean, these things live deep in the woods. And there are a lot of encounters where they're not alone. There's one, there's two, there's three. They seem to live in groups. Sometimes they're seen on their own. Sometimes they're seen in multiples.
Yeah. We've got a couple stories that that we talk about Bigfoot penis a lot. Hopefully we can say that on your show. Can we say that on your show?
Yeah, go right ahead.
There's a couple stories, and I think Bigfoot Club is probably the only one that actually talks about Bigfoot penis. So,
Bigfoot penis. Well, hey, remember I brought it up earlier.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, you sure did.
Come on, man. All right,
so
he was showing off.
Yeah,
doing a helicopter.
There was this story, like when I first got with TBRC. And we were trying to get local, like Texas, eyewitness reports, but we were getting them all over the country. And we got this one in Kentucky, and at the time I was working for Sprint, and so I had this like 1-800 number that we could call. Everybody could call in and just kind of conference call. Mm-hmm. And so we had this lady called in, and she was living, and I can't remember. I think the edge of Appalachia, and she was like in a trailer off a big hill or a big mountain or something. And she was telling us that, she was saying, Bigfoot wants to have sex with me. And we were asking, what? And it was like three of us. It was like myself.
She can't handle Bigfoot.
No, but she was telling us this story. And I was with my mentor, Luke Gross, and then another researcher. He's not around anymore, but, he's passed on. She was telling us that he was coming down, and we asked, why do you think he wants to have sex? She goes, well, I can see him coming down the mountain, and his penis is bouncing, and it's glowing. And I go, what? What? And so I turned to my mentor, And I go, is that possible? He says, well, Bob, there are some phosphorescent mushrooms in the wild. Bigfoots could, put their hands on him and then touch his penis. It's possible. And so she said he would come and he would bang on the trailer, try to get in, and she would yell at him back. And, at that time,
cat and mouse game, huh?
Yeah. It's like she's playing hard to get. So
he's knocking on the wall with his old pecker. Come on, let me in.
So
we'll give you some Bigfoot knocks right here.
Yeah.
He was probably knocking with the penis. But anyway.
So I don't need a log.
So we couldn't help her because she was in Kentucky. So we ended up reaching out to a local Bigfoot group, and we asked them. I said, "Hey, go help this lady." And if you can't follow through, but I don't think they ever followed through with us, and they wouldn't answer the phone after a while.
They probably heard the story and were like, "What?
Yeah,
no,
okay.
No, we're not doing this.
We're good. We're good.
No,
we believe
thank
her.
you.
That's fine."
Yeah.
Well, and so the thing too is that you hear all these stories about creatures that have been seen. Like for instance, in World War II, there was I believe he was a German. Not a German, but he was a French general, I want to say.
Mm-hmm.
They were flying over the Congo in a helicopter, and he said that they saw a snake that was about 50 feet long, and that this thing saw them and eventually lunged towards the helicopter, and they had to make a maneuver to get away from it.
That's crazy.
And they took pictures of it too. Let's see, I have it right here actually. So this is a picture of the creature. Let me pull this up. And taken by the general. That's it right there. So they were in a helicopter, and this has been analyzed by so many experts, and they've determined that this is not fake, this is not drawn, this is not superimposed. This is actually there.
It looks like a super anaconda or something.
Yeah, and they were flying over the Congo.
It's just Bigfoot's penis.
It's Bigfoot's penis. There we go. But again, it's here is a creature that was living deep in the Congo, that was never going to be seen, but they were flying over it with a fucking helicopter.
That's crazy.
Still be able to see it.
Wow.
Yeah,
it looks thick on the picture too.
Oh yeah, thick.
And then they said at one point that it noticed them, and that it cocked back and lunged towards the helicopter.
Yeah.
So they had to kind of pull away because they were like, "Oh shit!" But this is the picture they got. And
talk about French tickler.
Yeah, I know, right? And so creatures like anacondas this big have never been seen before.
Wow.
But you can't say that they don't exist. Mm-hmm. Just like colossal squid probably live deep down in the ocean, and they're gigantic, and they don't need to come up to the surface unless they're dying. They're don't know what they're doing. And so when it comes to something like Bigfoot, right? I mean, Native Americans have always talked about how there's always been that kind of, what do you call it? Like the king of the forest, something that nature, that the forest uses as its enforcer. And a lot of times, people always say, oh, well, it's bears, Mother Earth put bear in the wilderness to keep man in check. Mm-hmm. But, if you look deep enough, man, it sounds more like the Bigfoot has been the creature that has always been there as the king of the forest, especially throughout North America. Mm-hmm. And when you look at, obviously in the Ice Age, you had the massive land bridge, right? So a creature like a Gigantopithecus or something that was related to it could have easily made its way into the Americas. And then from there, just started populating the world. And something that Matt touched on in the last episode is that, if these creatures have a higher level of intelligence than, let's say, most creatures in the world, right? Mm-hmm. And they're seeing these wars, they're seeing, civil war, they're seeing, all these gunshots and destruction. And they're like, dude, these people are fucking weird. We live out here in the woods. We stay to ourselves. We don't talk to them. And, I think that's been passed down generations and generations of this is how we stay safe, and this is how we have to live.
Right, pass it down howls and tree knocks and stick structures.
But not only that though, the eyewitness testimonies of these creatures having the ability to lay down flat onto the ground and become almost invisible because of their fur and their color. They can blend in with their environment. I mean, there's probably so many things that they're able to do to camouflage themselves that we are clearly unaware of, or only have a slightest idea of what they do.
Yeah.
There's just, like I said, there's just too many stories that give credence to this creature existing. There's that story that we heard, I think it was on Matt's podcast or another one, where those kids were living in that trailer and their mom and dad left for like 3 days. I mean, again, these are not like ideal living situations, but these kids, they went out and they were walking in the forest, and this creature, a Bigfoot, landed right in front of them. Yeah. And they literally ran back to their house. Were so scared that a few of them hopped into that
ice cooler.
The ice cooler.
Yeah.
And they saw it. They saw it looking down in there like.
This story also was on These Woods Are Haunted too.
Yes.
So Matt interviewed the guy that was on there. So he said that he said the woods that haunted, These Woods Are Haunted had changed the story just a little bit, slightly. Mm-hmm. But I think if you listen to Matt's story, it's the unedited version of it. So
yeah, it's the uncut. Interesting enough, like I think it was maybe 20 years ago. I could be wrong, but they found hobbits. Hobbits living on an island, right? As another undiscovered type of species of ape or monkey or human kind of creature. I remember watching some shows on another, or reading some articles, apologies, on another type of early human that they believe buried their dead.
This was the skeleton remains, right? You're talking about skeleton remains?
Yeah. Okay. Skeleton remains in a cave. They found some drawings in there, very primitive drawings, but it was an undiscovered species that scientists didn't know existed on Earth.
Yeah.
So I think when you tie in those type of folklore that, hey, we didn't know it was there, or maybe it had been talked about, and they find it, then why can't something like that exist for a Bigfoot?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's
especially if it has the skills and ability to, find its own food, create its own shelter. I mean, these things, as far as we know, don't even use fire.
Yeah,
and more than likely they don't, because it draws the attention of predators. It draws the attention of man, and so they're like, no fire.
Yeah, I mean,
because they're big and hairy. I mean, I'm sure they can keep themselves warm, but you never hear about like, oh, I walked up on this random fire and it smelled like wet dog everywhere. It's usually they don't even use fire.
Because I always say this all the time, is that when you're trekking to the woods, you got to realize you have like clothes detergent, you got body spray, you got deodorant, you got leather in your shoes, and if you have a gun, you got gun oil. And so if a moose were to walk through your living room, you would know it, because it's like musty and it's wet and it just smells like an animal. So if a moose walked through your living room, you'd know it. And if we're walking through the woods, the Bigfoot's going to know it. He's going to know it before we do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think a lot of times whenever you hear stuff like that, whenever people see it, I think I always said this before, I think Bigfoots just kind of choose who they let them see like them. And sometimes they just duck out. So
no. One of the things that you brought up though was that, what if, these Bigfoots ghosts are haunting these areas, right? Mm-hmm. And so when you start thinking about that, that level of, paranormal when it comes to even like a Bigfoot, right? So if they have a high enough level of intelligence that perhaps when they die, that their soul will still remain. I know we're going off into a tangent here, just like our human beings. They'll haunt. Their spirits are known to haunt. Homes or areas of high trauma where somebody was killed or murdered or whatnot.
It's an imprint.
So if a Bigfoot has a high enough intelligence that when they die, depending on how they die and when they die or whatnot, that they have also the ability to remain in as a spirit. And those are the ones that people see where they're able to, what looks like kind of moving through dimensions, because they're a spirit, they're paranormal.
Yeah.
And they're doing the same things that people see ghosts do. Ghosts, I'm talking about human being ghosts, that is. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it is that because they have that higher level of intelligence that they are able to do the same things that humans do when they die in terms of being a ghost or haunting a certain area. And perhaps they take it upon themselves and say, hey, look, when this one dies, he's guarding that area as a spirit, and that's how they kind of keep their domain safe. It's just something to think about,
right,
just
absolutely.
because of the level of intelligence that they might be able to do that.
I love the way you guys think. I really, really do.
After watching that episode with Matt, I came to a realization. I didn't talk to you about this. Is that maybe because Matt was talking about the what do you call it, the tree structure art things?
Yes.
Because why does it look the same as the Bigfoot that did in Arizona or Washington
or Australia?
I honestly think that when a Bigfoot comes into age, they have a tradition to where they have to send them. They have to do a migration by themselves,
right,
to meet an elder who is like the oldest Bigfoot or one of the eldest Bigfoots on Earth, and they teach him. They teach him the ways of being them, and I think that's I'm pretty sure some of them didn't probably make it to go meet. They got crossed along the way. I'm not too sure, but I think they teach them stuff like that, making artwork like that, making calls, making what is what to avoid,
how to lay down.
Like I honestly think they really probably put patches of grass or of leaves or branches on the back of their hairs, just in case if they have to lay down or lie down, that they become one with the earth or one with the woods.
There's some
the structures, the structures that they've been known to make. Taking huge logs and trees and creating these structures out in the woods. And then you ask, how can the same Bigfoot from Wisconsin or wherever we said be able to do the same thing that? Hold on, this thing lost me. I'm all out of focus now.
It's okay. You're talking about different locations.
Yeah, and so there's how can they make the same kind of designs in what do you call them in California like they do in Oregon and in Oklahoma and all that? Well, when you look at it, right, what does a bee do? A bee instinctually knows how to make a beehive, and it makes it really fucking good. It knows how to do it like no problem. But that's all it does. These guys are able to not only make these structures to likely to communicate with one another or to show that like this area has been claimed by another group of Bigfoots, but they're able to do it because they've taught each other that, hey, this is how we stake claim to our area. So if another group of Bigfoots wander into here, they're going to see it and go, okay, there's another group here. Let's move on, or let's challenge them for their spot. Who knows? But I think that, when it comes to Bigfoots, I think that that's how they communicate with one another. Mm-hmm. And I almost feel like when they see these structures, they don't look at it like, hey, I need to challenge this other male for this territory. I feel like they do that so that when they see it, they know that, oh, there's others in this area. Like, as a way of communicating with one another, like we exist over here as well.
Yeah, my mentor Luke Gross in the late 90s, early 2000s, he believed that these stick structures were, because he was like, he knew everything about the woods. He knew like the Latin name of every tree and plant and stuff. He was like all into the woods. So his belief was, and it was just conjecture, that these Bigfoots were using like sticks like Mexican plum or like a berry tree or a berry branch or pecan or whatever. And they were stacking them in the area to let other Bigfoots know that what's in this area. So that's what he believed.
Oh, I see.
And so that's what he believed originally. And this was like 2000, 1999, 2000. Mm-hmm. And so I've always had that belief. I said, well, maybe he's right. Cause like, I couldn't, like, if I were to pick up a branch, I couldn't tell what tree it was. I go, where's this from? But he knew.
Think about too, you never hear stories about Bigfoots fighting one another.
Right.
Or like, a massive brawl happening in the woods that you were like, is that a bear fighting each other? Like, what's going on? And so that's why it's like, I don't think that these things fight each other. I think that these things, they lay down markers as a way of communicating with one another. Just like, if humans were living in hiding from another species that had more, that, essentially dominated the planet, we would leave signs or, something that would communicate to them like, hey, there's other humans around here. Okay, cool. So if we run into them, or be aware that we're going to probably run into them pretty soon because there's some in this area. And because if we didn't, and they were on a primordial, a primal level where they wanted to fight for each other's territory and property, then we would know of their existence. Yeah. Because you'd find dead bodies, in the woods. You would hear fighting. You would see more aggressive forms of dominating their area, their territory, but you don't. And so that's why I think that they communicate with one another and they don't kill each other.
Right. I
God forbid if we ever come across a Bigfoot serial killer. Because that's
not a Bigfoot serial killer.
That's not the way of their I guess their kind and stuff. So
there's always like an asshole Bigfoot anyway.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
I mean, imagine that, like a Bigfoot serial killer coming at you with his big flopping dick glowing. You're like, no,
this is how I go.
All I have is a stick. All I have is a stick.
I
don't have a gun.
Didn't we do a show on Bigfoot sex?
Yes. So, because I think we came across like imagine that one person, and this is probably they have never came forward on it. They just hold on to it because it scared the crap out of them, obviously. But not only running into a Bigfoot, you run into two, and they're fucking. And you're just
like, what do you say? What do you say?
I'll tell you what, man. I'll tell you what. If you run into that. And you don't pull out your phone and record, then there's something wrong.
or go buy a lotto ticket, So
exactly.
Holy shit!
And I think Chris was on that episode too. We were like discussing like the grunts and stuff. And they're just going to town and stuff, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe we went to this level.
Yeah, that's Bigfoot Club for you. Yeah. So we do that.
Oh boy!
Well, I mean, Daniel was talking about how they make like a baby crying sound.
Yes.
And fuck that. Yeah. If I'm in the woods and it's dark and I hear a baby crying, I'm like, I'm dead.
Yeah,
that is scary.
Yeah, forget it. That
is scary.
And then the stories of campers and hunters. Hearing these sounds and getting so spooked that they get their gun and they're just like, they're just fiery, kind of like, that scene in Predator with the Gatling gun.
Right.
They're just mowing down the forest.
We hit nothing.
And you don't even know who's out there. There could be somebody else walking around.
I think just want to tie into those tree structures. Yeah, I have
nothing.
I have like a little bit of a belief where, it kind of depends on how you look at it, right? So we have the pyramids, okay? We have pyramids in Egypt. We have pyramids in Japan. There's pyramids throughout Mexico, Central America, South America. There's obviously theories that these civilizations somehow spoke to each other. On the other token, maybe it's just a thing that humans do. Maybe humans build pyramids as a way to do things, right? As a way to worship something. It's just a natural thing that we do. And maybe these Bigfoots, when they do these tree structures, maybe it's a natural thing that they do.
Yeah.
Which is interesting if you try to tie it back to being a human versus that being, let's just say, some kind of creature. They're doing things that are natural to them, where I think these pyramids are natural to us to build, these structures of stones and stuff like that, where they do worship, whatever. So I think there's a little bit of that aspect. The way I look at these Bigfoot tree structures is that it's more of a natural instinct to do these things. This is kind of what they do. So.
Well, you think about it too. If
they made the temples of Giza and
No. We're not going to go that far.
I was like, whoa,
they were in Egypt. The Bigfoots.
Oh, the skunk ape made it.
I really like the way you guys think.
But think about that though, like the idea that human beings at its most basic level, when they form a civilization and they form a culture within that civilization, living in one area for a long time, they create ranks, they create a hierarchy of leaders and then kind of structures from there, that when they say, okay, we have to build something in order to worship or for whatever reason. You look at it, I mean, a pyramid or a step pyramid is the most basic form of how do we build a large structure that has a huge impact on our civilization, and I think that's why you see so many of them. And then similar to what I was saying about bees, how bees make beehives, and then obviously bees, wasps, hornets, they make different types of beehives, right? Mm-hmm. If you want to call it that. So here's Bigfoot. They're making these pyramid-shaped tree structures because that's the natural way to make a structure that's that they can communicate with one another. And it goes to show you that they are a branch off of let's say Homo sapien. They were another form of primate that was out there that never went away. I mean, we know that the Neanderthal existed alongside Homo sapiens for thousands of years before they eventually met their end. And really, they met their end because Homo sapiens essentially, made them extinct because there's so many of us, and we were taking over their hunting grounds that they began to be less and less of them. And then once their females started dying or males started dying, then it was just a matter of time. Mm-hmm. You look at Neanderthal, and in their attempts to reproduce by, let's say, kidnapping a Homo sapien, right, and trying to mate with it, and it's unable to because now they've become so separated genetically that their genetics just don't add up to anything. And so now they can't reproduce with a species of human that is running around alongside them in greater numbers, right? But somehow, Bigfoot, whatever species of primate or human or whatever you want to call it, they've been able to keep their numbers and reproduce and stay alive in this world. Now, how were they able to do that? How were they able to avoid what happened to the Neanderthal? Right. They're instinctively smarter. That's what I think. And so they're instinctively smarter. And for all we know, in the past, they may have had a relationship with Homo sapiens. Not in terms of like, hey, baby, but I'm saying like a relationship in which they coexisted alongside of them, so they weren't a threat to them. And so they were able to kind of coexist with humans. And as time went on, and then as more humans came from other areas, such as Europe and Spain, and, well, that's in Europe too, but you see what I'm saying? Yeah. When they started to come over, that's where the separation of human and Bigfoot relations began to separate. Because now humans are being faced with other humans who are trying to colonize this area, which would then force Bigfoots to say, okay, something is happening. Something is not good. There's tension in the air. We're going to go deeper into the woods and keep to ourselves. Yeah. And that's what forced them to say we cannot continue communication with them.
I mean, there's some stories of them having 3 toes instead of 5. So I mean, you kind of almost think that, well, maybe this one region they don't have any suitable mates, so maybe they actually have incest. So you can also probably have that as well. So
yeah, but just the idea of that of like another species of human that for whatever reason here, especially in the Americas, they were able to coexist with Homo sapien as opposed to being like, hey, that's another species that we can't trust or we have to fight for food with. Instead they said, hey, we can coexist with you and we can help each other. And they formed a relationship. And who knows, maybe that deteriorated over time. But that allowed them to exist longer into into reality.
Yeah, there's a story in Russia, I think it's Russia, where they captured a female Bigfoot, caged it. I think you guys probably heard of that.
Yeah.
And then the guy who caught it ended up getting it pregnant, and they had like interesting looking kids, I guess. And they're trying to, check the, like the family tree and just look at all the different groups that came out of it. And they all have like these big features, so it's pretty wild to think about that, because when you hear people say that it looks like Native American or something like that,
that was like in the 1800s, right? That was like in the 1800s.
Yeah, it was a long time ago. Yeah, so there are stories like that out there where they do intermingle with humans, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And just hearing people talk, that looked like a man. That kind of makes you think, boy, at some point, did they get their genes crossed in?
Yeah. I've actually had some interviews that I've done with people where people say, oh, well, I go, what did it look like? And they say, it looked like a homeless man, with just hair. And then I had some other people say it looked like an ape. And then,
and that's the thing too, is that like you look at the disorder, I think it's called, I'm looking at it right now, hypertrichosis, where basically you grow an excessive amount of hair on your face and on your body. And so if somebody were to meet someone like that, others could say, oh yeah, she was like a monster, or she was like not knowing what they're seeing, not knowing how to describe what they're seeing. And perhaps she was living out there in the wilderness because of of her ridicule and her exile because of how she looked. And then he found her in the woods and said, "Oh my God, look at this."
Yeah, there's that Russian guy. She's beautiful.
Yeah, there's that Russian. there's tribes, or maybe one tribe. I'm not sure how many tribes do this, but I've seen where they send men to live in the woods on their own, and over time they become somewhat kind of like animalistic in a way, where they're not allowed to leave the woods. They have to be out there as part of some kind of spiritual thing they have to go through. But, who knows if some of these sightings were, some of these, natives that were just doing their cultural practice and staying out in the woods for way too long and getting hairy and stinking and who knows?
Yeah.
So I think there might be a little bit of that too,
Well, the argument too that, the size of a Bigfoot, the height in like 8 to 12 feet, the weight of it, it's pure mass. People would argue there's no way a creature could live with that size in the wilderness and not be seen by humans, because bears are really big, but you see them because they don't give a shit. They're just like, well, I don't care. I'm going to search this trash can. I don't give a fuck. But I mean, I just think that there's a higher level of intelligence and a higher level of deception when it comes to Bigfoots in terms of how they hunt, how they find their food, and what they do. And again, that lends to intelligence, that they have rules that they follow by. They've been taught by one another, like, hey, when you look for food, this is what you do, and you don't deviate from this.
Yeah. I had a question for you guys, Robert, Steven, and it just bailed on me too. Have you heard any stories about a Sasquatch hunting, going after a deer, going after an elk? Because I'm assuming that a Bigfoot would probably occasionally eat meat. They're probably more herbivores than they are carnivores. But I mean, have you heard anything like that?
Most of the stories that I've had are they're omnivorous. They're opportunistic. They eat anything from dumpster stuff, like I was telling you earlier, to grease pits, to watermelons, cantaloupes, and I've heard of them like picking up game. Now I've never investigated any of it, but I've heard stories of them, picking up stuff. Like one of the guys, the guy I was telling you about, the one that said the Bigfoot, the wood swallowed it up. That gentleman had hogs. He had hogs, and he had like a high fence around these hogs without even going through the gate, without opening the gate. It just leaned over, picked it up, walked off. So I've never heard of, I mean, I've heard of stories, but I've never interviewed anybody that said, yeah, I shot this elk and this Bigfoot came and scooped it up. You know,
Took my meal.
I've heard of it. Like I've read stories about it, but I've never interviewed anybody.
Wasn't there a story too that this one always stuck with me is someone like saw like a deer just chilling and then a Bigfoot came up behind it and grabbed its neck, like the base of its neck, and like snapped it back. And then their legs, they snapped it forward, and then they just picked it up.
Yeah,
like
I think
that one scared the crap. I was like, oh, wow.
I think maybe we talked about it on the show once. I think.
Oh, okay.
It was a story from another researcher or podcast.
Yeah,
but yeah. Hey guys, do you how does the Bigfoot Club people find your podcasts?
You can find our podcast on Spotify and on Google Podcasts. I'll have it up on Apple Podcasts pretty soon, just under Beyond the Unknown. You can also follow us on YouTube at Beyond the Unknown. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe to our channel. And, of course, follow us on Spotify and on Google Podcasts.
Right on. Thank you.
Awesome. Guys, thank you so much for coming on here and meeting with us and talking with us. This was so much fun. We'll have to do it again sometime. Real soon.
Absolutely.
Awesome, man. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.